is going to be very helpful because we are going to finally see how to choose the best fabric for your project, which is part of our Stitching Accurately class. What most beginning sewists do is they find a fabric that they absolutely love, but may not be right for the project they've chosen, which is why they get frustrated and the project goes unfinished. But this video will fix all of that so you can go from struggling sewist to super seamstress. And full disclosure, there are a lot of components that go into choosing a fabric that is right for your project. We're gonna mainly focus on choosing the right prints, and Kathy's gonna show us some samples.
What I have here today is a pattern that is really super simple, and we would consider this a beginning pattern.
This is a table runner, right?
This is a table runner, that's absolutely right. But I have a lot of samples with this because some of them are really simple and some of the fabrics make it super difficult. So let's look at what that is. Like our flowers here, it doesn't matter which way I lay them, they'll still look good.
Right, because this is a non-directional fabric. So for this one, our fox are going all different directions. And why does that make it easier to use in a project like this?
Because I don't have to pay any attention to which direction it's going to. I
So
don't
I
have to
can
worry.
I can just cut it up and not think about it.
That's
I love
exactly
that.
right. This next one has direction to it.
Oh, because our deer are going in one direction, right? We don't want sideways deer
Or upside
or
down
upside
deer.
down deer.
And often, even experts will fall into this trap, is that you have something that's directional. You're paying attention to how to put your project all together, and you get it together, and you're like,
You have one
It's
deer that is
upside
going
down.
the opposite direction. Okay, so this makes our project a little bit harder.
a little bit harder to
when
do.
We use
That's
a
right.
directional fabric. All right, cool.
Then the next thing is checks and stripes
Oh.
and plaids.
So what makes these hard to work with in our projects?
We have to make sure that they're cut straight so that they don't go off on an angle. I was just looking at this fabric, and
Yeah, I love
what we
this.
would have to pay attention to is, see this little dot that's all along here?
Oh, the full
We
moon.
would have to make sure that the full moon is cut
isn't
straight so
diagonal.
it's not off on an angle.
Well, geez, it's just made this fabric a little bit more complicated to use than I thought. Here, I thought that this was like a pretty easy stripe to manage. Like, you just keep this straight and you'll be good to go. But there's another component to think about when you look at this motif. And like Kathy just said, you want to try to keep all of those full moons all parallel.
And we would have this same thing in this.
In
We
a
would
check.
want to make sure in this check that we cut straight along the line. So once again, it didn't end up being crooked, because it's really distracting. And even if you don't know what's wrong with the project, everybody notices it and they're like,
you kind of like look like
oh,
this.
what
like,
is
what's
that?
going on
Something
there?
isn't quite right.
Okay.
And then plaids. I think this plaid is probably an easier one to work with because it really is not so linear as some.
Yeah, it's kind of got
But-
that watercolor
yeah, so that-
quality to it. So it's a little bit easier as far as checks go. But something like that, where you have your stripes and you've got those really obvious lines, those end up being a little bit more challenging. So you just have to pay a little bit more attention, right?
Yeah. And then this guy, this one actually needs to be fussy cut because I didn't want to cut off half of his skull, right?
Wait, go back and tell me, what is fussy cutting?
So fussy cutting is, I find a motif that I want to probably have centered in a block, and so then I have to decide, where is that going to lay within my block,
okay.
and how am I going to position it so that
If you're bad at decisions like me, maybe wait on fussy cutting a little bit, because I would be like, which is my favorite deer that I am gonna spotlight?
these skulls took me a long time to do because I had to decide which skull did I want to use, because they were all a little bit different, and like what was the center point of the skull in my block.
Exactly.
So what it did is it made a really, really simple project
take you hours.
Really, because I agonized over how did I want to cut them. And so that it's a good way to be able to see that we went from a very, very simple project to something that was much more difficult.
Yeah, from our all-overs where you can just cut it and it doesn't matter, to something that you have to pay a lot more attention to. What about this last project here? I did this one. So this was like fussy cutting to the extreme, okay?
So that,
which was totally worth it. It just took a long time to do for like a small home deck project, right?
So that once again, the fabric made it so it was a much more difficult project. So while we would have this project labeled on the pattern, because it is a Smile Spinners pattern design, as being easy, your fabric choices can make it so it's really very difficult. So in this, Jessica made sure once again that she did that fussy cutting. Then she had stripes. So she had to make sure that everything was cut perfectly. And that is one of those things where you really agonize over.
Listen, I even thought about, are these little green strips, even though those little hash marks on there are, not fully straight, I was trying to get them as linear as possible. This little check, same thing. And yeah, and that just takes a little bit more time and effort. So you want to make sure that you really think about your fabric print choices from the standpoint of directional, non-directional, what else?
Stripes, plaids, checks, or fussy cutting.
I just want to talk a little bit about our other projects. We looked at some quilting type projects first, but when it comes to garments and accessories, the same rules apply. You want to be really considerate about where your print is going to land on a garment and on an accessory, because for something like this, the tote bag was actually made with all one piece of fabric in the pattern directions. And a directional print like this would be right side up on one side, but it would be upside down on the opposite side. So what we've done on this pattern is we've actually added a seam on the bottom. So that way we could make sure that our birds are going in the right direction on both sides of our bag. Similarly, this garment, you want to make sure that an arrow is centered on the places that you want to draw attention to and not centered on the places that you don't want to draw attention to. Now you know how to pick a fabric for your next sewing project. But do you know how to use a pattern properly? You are ready for one of our skill builders. Stitching Accurately might be a good one. It teaches you how to cut your fabric properly and go into design. And our skill builders are set up to give you all of those skills so that you can work through a project with success. Visit us at smilespinners.com to sign up for class.
See you there.
See you there.